Hi, Valentina.
Hello, hello. Gosh, the sunshine is gorgeous today, isn't it? Well, I don't know where everyone's tuning in from, but it is in London.
Yes, it is lovely. It's nice and sunny, and I really like it when it's cold and fresh and sunny. For me, it can be as cold as it wanted to be for as long as we have clear blue sky and sunshine. So,
Yes,
yeah, it really makes a big difference in how we feel and the energy that we have, right?
certainly. Yeah, and it gets us outside doing things, seeing people, and I guess that kind of leads me into the topic a little bit of today's live is about our relationships. So the benefit of good social relationships on our health is starting to be recognized a lot more than it has been. But also, we'll come on to some tips about how to maintain healthy relationships, things to be aware of in yourself and in others, so that you really reap the full rewards of those social relationships in your health.
Yes, and we'll be looking at the different aspects of those types of connections that we have in our lives and what are the different impacts of that on different areas of our lives and physical and mental health and specific ways of how we can improve that. And finally, one important thing as well that we will cover in this is the relationship we have with ourselves. So stay tuned in, give us a shout, say hello, let us know from where you are listening, and any questions that you have, please feel free to engage with us, and we'll do our best to answer all of your comments and questions. So, yeah, Valentina, do you want to get started by telling us a little bit more, why we even chosen to highlight this topic today, right? Why we're talking about relationships and the importance of those social connections, why we should care about this.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a couple of things with it. And I think what I want to highlight as well is that when we're talking about relationships, we are talking about all of our relationships. We're talking about our friendships, our working relationships, our romantic relationships. I know there's Valentine's Day coming up for people who like to celebrate that. We're talking about relationships with our family members and even just our social connections to kind of people in our local community. And the reason that it is so important is there's more studies coming out about the damaging effects of loneliness. So it's now estimated that loneliness is as harmful as smoking, which I think maybe 10 years ago we wouldn't have thought, or kind of we would never have made that sort of comparison, because while we know that we enjoy having good relationships, we don't think about the impact that that's actually having on our day-to-day well-being and on our physical health as well. So people who experience prolonged social isolation on average die about 15 years earlier than people who have strong, healthy relationships in their adult lives. And I think that's quite a significant statistic, that it can lead to so many other, or exacerbate so many other health issues. So I think even, especially in younger people and people in their 20s, a lack of social relationships has been shown to increase the risk of obesity, inflammation, high blood pressure. And then all of those things can contribute to wider, more dangerous problems like heart disease, stroke, cancer, things like that. So really, it's kind of an imperative to have a think about your social relationships and prioritize them, because often I think they can be one of the things that we let slip when work pressures and other things kind of take over our lives. We often see our social relationships as a nice to have rather than a fundamental of our well-being. But really, they are a fundamental of our well-being, to the extent that not having them is just as damaging as smoking cigarettes.
Absolutely, and especially, you mentioned already, like risks of heart disease, for example, and the fact that people uh, with less social connections and lack of those close relationships, they are um, they die young, they die earlier, essentially, right? So really, it's loneliness is not only harmful, right? It's deadly in that way, right? It shortens your lifespan. And
Yeah.
also, there's been this study done. We've published a post a while ago on our company page about happiness, right? So when we look at the research on that, it's very, very interesting to see that researchers, this is a longitudinal study that's been done over 80 years, where researchers tracked thousands of individuals to look at what makes people happy and what makes them well, what makes them really feel like they're leading those fulfilling lives. And definitely the relationships are seen as having some of the biggest impact on our well-being. And it's not necessarily the amount of friends or connections we have, it's actually the quality and the depth of those relationships that we have. Do you have someone to turn to when you are in need? Do you have a person with whom you can share, your deepest fears? Do you have someone with whom you can really connect on your hopes and dreams, and share your wildest imaginations, without being turned down or feeling not worthy, right? So it's those quality of those connections that really matter. And I think very often when we see some of this research saying that, oh, happy couples live longer, or people in good relationships live longer, it may often feel as if single people are now somehow at the disadvantage. But this is not true, because this is not just about those intimate sexual relationships, right? Like you have mentioned, Valentina, it's not just about those romantic relationships. Actually, it's about all the other social connections and all the relationships that we have in our lives. And there is this concept of social capital that we actually have to build and invest in it, and that has a huge return on our health and well-being. So it's not just about being in the relationship, it's how many social connections and what is the quality of those connections that we have that can then translate in our health and well-being and happiness.
Absolutely. And something I want to touch on there is that, so we talk about the difference between our romantic or our sexual relationships and our platonic relationships. And there's been this real emphasis in our society and in culture on our romantic relationships as the kind of at the top of this hierarchy, let's say. And what that ends up doing is it means that we often then think that there are a lot of things that we should or could only get from a romantic connection. And I think that can be really, really harmful, because what it does is it means that when we limit ourselves, we limit the intimacy and the bonds that we can have with the other people in our lives. Things like having an emotional intimacy with someone. A lot of people only feel comfortable doing that within their romantic relationship. However, what that means is I would argue, overburdens the people within the romantic relationship for each other's emotional turmoil, or positive things as well. But it also means that then that puts pressure on a relationship whereby we're looking for too many of our needs to be satisfied by one person, and that puts a huge amount of pressure on that person and that relationship. And what I would really encourage people to do is start, there are certain things that you want to protect within your romantic relationship to make it feel special, or romantic relationships if you have many. And that's not wrong. It's nice to feel like that there's something that's unique and shared between you and another person, or a selection of other people. However, what I would really encourage is to question it. So rather than just accepting, these are things that are only for a romantic relationship, start asking yourself, like, maybe there's something here that I can actually enjoy within my platonic friendships. So things like physical touch, we often associate that with something sexual. And I think that's a really sad and unfortunate thing in our society, that we've really hypersexualized touch, and it doesn't need to be. You know, there's
Exactly.
so much value in just having affectionate, platonic, tender touch with your friends and family. The hormones that releases has such a positive effect on your empathy, your ability to feel safe and trusting of others. And to limit that only to a sexualized kind of touch, I mean, that's very different. That takes away the kind of maternal, paternal element to it that can make us feel safe. And so I would encourage people to, you know, not limit that to their romantic relationships. And I know a lot of people have different boundaries with that kind of thing, and they don't like being hugged, or they don't like being touched in that way. And also you might have associated trauma with it. So understanding your own boundaries and your own needs with that, I would encourage people to just start questioning where they can maybe kind of spread that a little bit among their friends, and just question your relationship with touch. So is it something that you feel like always has a sexualized element, or is it something that you feel like you can really benefit from in a platonic, comfortable and open way that doesn't need to have this weight of hypersexualized society or hypersexualized popular culture that we often see around us?
I'm really, really happy to hear you saying that, because, you know, I think it's so, so important that, you know, we recognize the importance of that physical touch, you know, and it has emotional, emotional regulating quality to it. It really balances our hormones. It actually balances our microbiome, which then influence our immunity and physical health, right? So physical touch is so, so important. And it is really, really unfortunate that in our modern environment, it is overly sexualized in that way. And, you know, you're not allowed to touch anyone unless, you know, you have intentions to go further, right? And that is really, really sad reality. And definitely we would encourage to kind of take action to change that, because if we are excluding touch from our lives, we are really, really damaging our health and even our immunity from that point of view. And especially during the pandemic, where now I think this divide has really been widened between, you know, people who are kind of craving that skin contact and that touch, you know, and they are, you know, very kind of people who like hugs, and they will always want that physical contact with their family, with their friends. I'm one of them. For me, I think it's so, so important. But then there are some other people, like you mentioned, who don't necessarily, you know, who like to maintain those physical barriers, who don't necessarily like to be touched. And now, because of the pandemic, because of the isolation, because of, you know, the spread of coronavirus and so on, those things were exacerbated, because now people who needed that touch, now they crave even more of it because they couldn't have it for a period of time. And those people who were wary of it, now there are even more reasons for them to be wary of it because of the virus. So this gap is ever increasing, and it is sad to see that our relationship with that physical touch is distorted in a modern society, and yeah, overly sexualized, like you mentioned, Valentina.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it's not something, I know that it's, we as individuals, we have to understand that our society does sexualize touch to a certain degree. So I'm not saying, you know, go out and start touching everyone you meet on the street or whatever. But what I'm saying is to maybe just become more aware of the difference. So, and allow yourself to enjoy the kind of intimacy of affection without automatically making the association that that must be something that's sexual. Because I think that it is something to do with a level of self-awareness, and also being able to separate our own feelings in a situation. And also, the more you have kind of platonic, affectionate relationships with people, the less intense it will feel when somebody does just touch your arm, or hold your hand, or give you a cuddle, and it will just feel like a normal part of your everyday life, rather than feeling like something that you have to then think about loads and think about the connotations of, and what does this mean, is this the sexualized thing? It will just feel natural, because it is such a natural part of our human engagement. It's how we form relationships. It's obviously not the only way we form relationships, but it's a really big part of showing someone that you're a safe person to them. To touch them with affection is a very kind of it's a behavioral act that shows that intention of kindness, which when we're not working with language in terms of like spoken language, it's nice to be able to have that physical language to just show, like just situations where you might just notice that someone's feeling a bit vulnerable and put your hand on their leg or their shoulder or their arm.
And it's so crucial for our psychological sense of safety. And this is also, for those of you who are aware of attachment theory, this is exactly where it stemmed from. That initially, they observed monkeys and their little babies, and as cruel as those first experiments were in psychology, they would separate newborn babies from their mothers, and they placed them with kind of surrogate mothers who are not real. One would be literally a wire with bottle of food, and another one had no food but had fluffy, soft, huggable body, right? And that was really big learning for the researchers, because they realized that those baby monkeys were attached to that fluffy, huggable figure, even though it had no food, it had nothing else. But the sensation of comfort that you get from that was way more important for them than the food. And the whole attachment theory of making someone feel secure and being held in that way has huge implications on child development and our levels of kind of emotional self-regulation, because small baby doesn't know how to self-regulate, and they only learn how to do that by other person regulating them first. And that physical touch is the most important and actually the only way to soothe the baby, right? So we are transferring not only just that physical touch, there is a lot of other kind of energies and our sense of feeling somebody else's body rhythm, heartbeat, the sound of the voice, exchanging microbiome. There is a lot of other neurobiological processes that are happening when we touch, right? So it's so important for our health and for the psychological well-being of it. But I want to go back, Valentina, to other point that you've mentioned as well, which is also the expectations that we place on our partner, right?
Yeah.
I think this is so crucial, that we live in a world where we expect the perfect person, right? We are just expect to find the one ideal, right? The guy, the girl, whoever that fits all of our tick boxes, right? Like we do shopping with a checklist, right? And we place so much expectations on that person to be that ideal, and in reality it's not possible, and that is often the cause of conflict and why our relationships break down, because we are simply expecting way too much of that person, and there is way too much burden on that person to satisfy all of our needs.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think something that's really important to recognize with that is that there's, going back to what you were saying about attachment, is that a lot of our fears around going to others with those needs or expecting those needs from others
Yeah.
come from a fear of then that contributing to a loss of attachment with our primary partner or a romantic partner or whoever. And actually, again, if you look into attachment theory, a secure attachment, the securest of attachments, are ones where someone is both free to roam and come home. And that is such an important thing to remember, is that, if we deny someone that freedom, it is not a choice to be at home. It will feel, it becomes a dependence that can actually, people can end up resenting that kind of dependence, which can contribute to difficulties in relationship dynamics. So recognizing that actually spreading those needs across other social relationships actually will strengthen your primary partnership, if that's what you're looking to do, rather than take away from it. And I kind of want that to sink in for people, because I think in our like social and cultural context, and especially within our entertainment industry, romantic relationships and having this ideal one, and then you meet someone and all of the woes of your life are fixed, and you kind of never have disagreements, and you just meet every need of each other's. We see this storyline perpetuated over and over again. I think it's really, really harmful, because it's unrealistic. But it's also not something that we should want to aim for anyway. I mean, I don't know about you, but I like having a variety of social relationships. I like to encounter different ideas, different perspectives. It's more stimulating, and people who have different interests to me, and people who have different opinions to me, that's how I learn, that's how I feel connected to wider ideas amongst society and wider social groups. So there's a lot to be gained.
Absolutely. It's so, so important. And I can speak from experience of being in quite abusive and controlling relationship, where you don't actually have that freedom to talk to whoever you want to, right? And you are expected just, to be for this person and do everything because of them and the way they would prefer. And the limitations that are then being placed on that relationship can do a lot of damage to us, right? And I think, well, from kind of more practical point of view, there is something that I can share, how exactly do you do this in a healthy way? And I think the best way to do this is a little exercise where we can reflect on what do we need out of the relationships in general, right? So not making another list of what I expect out of my partner, but actually making the whole thing of what do I need out of relationships, right? So for example, I want emotional support, and I want somebody just to listen to me, right? I don't need somebody to tell me what to do and so on. I want trust and somewhere where I can just offload and share my emotions, whatever that I feel. I want somebody to just hold that space for me, right? That's one of the needs. The other need is actually, I want somebody else to tell me what to do with my business, right? And actually challenge me and tell me what to do, what not to do, and call me out on when I'm not doing something in the right way. Now, this is very different skill set, right? And this is more of a kind of a mentorship relationship where somebody can really pull out some of your processes and what you are doing. And they are very, very different things to do, right?
Yeah.
And yet I was expecting both of those things to be done by my partner. And then I realized that actually he can't do either of those things, right? And therefore, I have some other friends and some other coaches, some other mentors and therapists and so on, where I can actually go for that emotional support. And I can find some great business mentors who can understand, my area of work, and who can give me, great feedback and advice on that. And that means that I have to go out of that romantic relationship to go elsewhere and build those different social bonds to be able to satisfy those needs. And then my partner has to accept that there are certain things that I get from him, and then there are certain things that he can't give me, right? So making it more of kind of exploration to say, like, what do I need out of the relationship? And being very open with your partner to say, which of those needs do you feel that, I'm satisfying for you? Which are some of those things that I'm prepared to do? And which are of those things that, I'm not good at, or maybe I don't want to do, or I choose not to do that. And being able to respect other person's needs so they can have a freedom to have those other healthy friendships, relationships, connections, to have all of our social needs met, so we are not overly burdening that one person with all of these expectations of who they have to be to satisfy all of those conflicting needs in us.
Definitely. And that's a real marker of abusive relationships. And I'd maybe like to take a minute just to recognize that for anyone who might be listening and is feeling some of these dynamics in their life. Those kinds of relationships, abusive relationships, we often struggle to identify them as abusive because we love the person that is harming us, and because also we see their vulnerability. So often abusive behaviors can come from a vulnerable and hurt state, but that doesn't make them okay. It's not okay to hurt just because you've been hurt or because you are hurting. And if you're noticing controlling behavior, someone who is trying to limit your relationships with other people, limit your freedoms outside of the relationship in terms of where you go, what you do, limit your financial independence, limit your access to information, your access to support, by things like, keeping you so busy that you don't have time for anything else, or saying, picking fights with friends of yours or problems with them to say, oh no, that person isn't trustworthy, or that person isn't trustworthy. Things that make you have doubts about your other relationships. Also diminishing your successes, bringing down your confidence, saying that you're not good at this or you wouldn't be able to do that, and things like that. These are all tactics that can be used to control someone, by diminishing their sense of self-worth, and by making or creating a dependence on an abuser. And I just wanted to highlight those because I think that often, in relationships, those early warning signs can get overlooked, and we can often confuse them with like a passionate romantic love of, that has jealousy, and someone obsessively wants to be with you all the time, and that can feel amazing. I mean, often this technique is called love bombing, where you feel, someone absolutely centers you in their universe and makes you feel amazing, like you're the kind of pinnacle of their attention, bigs up your confidence, all of these things, and then takes it away and makes you work to get that feeling back again, and then you're constantly working to get it back. So I just wanted to highlight those things because while it can be a difficult subject, I do think it's really important to talk about them when we are talking about relationships, to notice what some of those dysfunctional dynamics are as the contrast to the functional dynamics that we're aiming towards, which is where there's a balance in terms of needs being met by each other. So it shouldn't ever be that one person is only really serving the other person's needs, or that their happiness is totally dependent on one other person, but also that there's a balance across your relationships, that your needs are being met by others. Because if you're, that strengthens you, and it strengthens your independence and your ability to make kind of informed, logical choices, that otherwise, that wouldn't be kind of negatively affecting your life. Say if you wanted to leave a relationship but you were financially dependent on that person and you didn't have good social connections, then you might feel you have nowhere to go. Whereas if you always make sure you maintain those social connections, your choices within your relationship will be a lot stronger, because you'll be able to know that there's somewhere else for you to go. And kind of going back as well to the nature of intimacy in your other relationships. It's so important to talk about what's happening in your life, talk about the difficult things. If you are experiencing difficulties or concerns in your romantic relationships, talk about that with your friends. even if you feel embarrassed or you feel like it doesn't paint you in a great light, maybe you've done something that you feel a bit ashamed of, doesn't matter. Talk to your friends about it. No doubt that, you know, they'll still want to support you, or they'll understand where something is coming from. But equally, talk to your friends about other difficult things like finances, about your sexuality, about, you know, your sexual health or your sexual desires. Talk to them about your, you know, concerns around health or life and death, you know, all sorts. But I guess the encouragement here is to really make sure that you're creating those independent and intimate relationships with multiple people in your life, so that you're not overburdening one relationship, but also it means that you're in a safer position in terms of having healthy relationships all around.
Absolutely, that's the key. And, you know, having this kind of all-rounded set of relationships and connections, you know, ability to speak with different people at very vulnerable, open, honest, deep level, it's so crucial to feeling that independence and building that confidence, but also nearly like having that kind of sense check of our reality. Because what often happens with abusive relationships, that, you know, we kind of become deluded in our own world, right? Because if our point of view is only being painted by the beliefs and values and approaches of this one person, of this one individual, it is very easy to end up doubting ourselves, and actually to the point where we don't believe in our own reality, right? And we always feel that we've done something wrong and we are not worthy. And, you know, the reason why other person behaved that way is because of us, that, you know, I must have done something wrong to trigger that behavior in another person. But, you know, at the end of the day, each of us own our behaviors, our emotions, and our responses to them, right? Nobody else places anger in you. Nobody else places, you know, the act of physically hitting someone else and makes them do this, right? It's our own actions and our responses. And the moment we are feel not in control of our emotions, of our feelings and our responses, we are most likely in the abusive relationship, in some sort of unhealthy social context that doesn't allow us to take control of our own health and well-being. And it is a key that when we are fully responsible and able to provide for our own needs, you know, of course, you know, those social connections are part of this, right? So when I say like provide for those needs, I actually really mean your ability to also build and maintain those different social connections, and, you know, build that social capital and benefit from that. But you are in control, right? You understand what your needs are. You understand with whom you need to connect to have that specific need met, and you have a freedom to do so because you are the one who understands what you need. And individual needs are, yeah, very personal. It's, you know, what my needs are, what your needs are in different areas of life will be very different. And therefore, speaking with other people and trying to understand how they have all of these physical, emotional, sexual, all of the other needs met can really open up our choices of possibilities. And if we are only limiting ourselves to that one person and their world of view, we end up in a place eventually when we realize that we're not living our own life, right? We don't know who we are, we don't know what we want, and we are living on terms and conditions of other person or their expectations, and that's really what abusive relationship is. Because, you know, sometimes from outside, people think that to be an abusive relationship is to be, you know, beaten up physically or so on. But actually, the emotional aspects of it are even more damaging, and it's more difficult to understand and more difficult to sometimes identify that you are in that abusive relationship until it's gone too far. and now you are too far in having have lost your other connections, having lost your other relationships, having lost access to some resources and access to support, and you have lost your own confidence and believe in yourself, and now it becomes very, very difficult to get out of that relationship. So for anyone who's listening, if for whatever reason, if it sounds like you, if you need any help and support, please, please, please reach out to us, reach out to someone who can kind of help you to make sense out of that situation, and can guide you to take some of those little steps to rebuild healthier relationships and healthier connections in your life. So it's so crucial.
Certainly, and we'll put a link to some services that you can access as well that can support you if you don't feel that you have those personal relationships in your life. And I also just want to kind of track back and say thank you, Evelina, for sharing about your personal experience, because I do think it's a very difficult thing to talk about, but it's so important that we do, exactly for the reasons that you said, because it can, when you're in that experience and in that relationship, your perception of reality does totally change. And
absolutely, yeah.
It's, you're so disconnected from what is realistic and reasonable, that your whole world is tied into this other person's emotions and how to please them so that your life is easier and nicer, rather than realizing that there's an option not to have.
Absolutely. And like you mentioned, like a lot of abuse and the way we treat other people comes from our own unmet needs and hurts, right? So sometimes, especially for us who are kind of working in this kind of psychological well-being field, and you really understand, you can kind of see through other people's wounds. It makes it sometimes more difficult to draw those boundaries, because you understand why they behave the way they behave, right? You can nearly justify that, the reason that they did this to you is because, they are hurt themselves, because they're feeling insecure, because that's how they've been treated when they were a child, that they need that control and sense of pulling the strings in their own life, because that's their psychological sense of safety. They don't have their own sense of self-worth. Therefore, they need somebody else to refuel their cup all the time. And that's from where those kind of unhealthy dependencies and insecurities develop, that leads into overly controlling behaviors.
Right.
So definitely, all of those things have a reason, and it is perfectly fine to kind of dig deeper and understand, but it is very important as well that we can't change other people, right? So if I understand my own fears, my own wounds, my own insecurities, I can choose to do something about it, and then that means I am able to heal. But if I am blind to that, if I deny that I'm ever in a wrong, and I feel that it's other people who are always doing something to me, and the other people who are wrong, and the world is unsafe, and people can't be trusted, then in that case you can't change what you're not aware of, and there's nothing we can do other than leave that relationship, right?
Yeah.
So it's really, really important that people can change, and people do change, but only if they want to, and only if they are aware of their own wounds and insecurities. So do the work on yourself. Don't try to waste your life trying to change somebody else and hoping that other person, that you can make other person into a better human being, right? We can only change ourselves, and therefore the quality of our relationships, and this is something that our trainers, Stephen and Robert Dills, Stephen Gilligan and Robert Dills, they're always highlighting this, that the quality of relationships in our life will only ever be as good as our relationship with ourselves, right? And that's the message that we want to leave you with for today, is to really kind of look at, how am I fulfilling my own needs? How am I providing for my own wounds and insecurities. Am I able to self-regulate my own emotions? Am I able to build those healthy relationships? Am I able to understand what my needs are? And do I know how to build those networks, connections, and resources to be able to get those needs met? Or am I expecting somebody else to do this for me? And is it other people who are constantly kind of triggering me into some actions, responses, and behaviors that we then regret? Right.
Yeah.
So that's the message we'd like to leave you with. And we really, really hope that you have the best relationships in your lives with yourselves and with other people. And if you do need any help, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'll share some other resources of support for you with that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Evelina.
Thanks, Valentina, and bye, everyone. Have a lovely day.